Hey guys, it's Shane here at Tanker Miniatures, and today's video, we're looking at what has the better design. The Imperial Guard from 40k as we know it, or the Solar Auxilia from Horus Heresy. Now the Solar Auxilia have the most interesting progression of all Warhammer. They started as modern day soldiers on Earth of course, then evolved into techno-barbarians once of course Earth fell into ruin and decline. Then, of course, once it was unified again, they went back to being space crusaders. And then, of course, over the span of 30,000 years, sort of fell back into the design of modern soldiers. So let's look into how that happened exactly. Now, you might argue that the Space Marines have made just as many changes over the course of 20,000 years or so, but really it's a lot more subtle. Their armor just gets more advanced, from Mark 1 to the now Mark 10. Over the Heresy, they went through a lot of design changes, but fundamentally, power armor works the same. A Space Marine is still a Space Marine underneath it, and he still acts in the same mindset. Now, what really sets the Solar Auxilia apart from other military soldiers is just how unique they look. They've got their void suits, which allow them to survive in space, as well as on planets, especially with bad atmospheres, so they can still survive hazardous environments. They're not just there to fight on a planet, they're there to endure on a planet, explore a planet. And they have these sci-fi looking weapons with all the tubes and the extra parts, and it all looks really old school sci-fi. The vehicles as well have this really unique design, where things aren't smoothed out. We're just seeing the structural elements that hold the vehicle together. Things are just stuck on the sides. It's just going pure function over form. They don't care what it looks like. They're just trying to rush these things out to support everyone. They don't need to uphold a standard. They just need to get the job done. People weren't caring about fancy things. They weren't caring about some sort of legacy of a certain regiment. They were all just, here's what the vehicle has to do, let's get it, let's make it as functional as possible, and we'll go out there and we'll use it. It doesn't matter how rugged it looks, it just needs to do the job. And these all just exemplify that with its sort of boxy look. You see the moving parts. It's really interesting to see. Now, what's really interesting is all these designs are very similar to the previous games 40k was based off. Even Rogue Trader was based off these. Laserburn and Spacefarers. Now these were combat skirmish games, much more like Necromunda or the Inquisitor 28 series. So, small scales, you build your teams up, they get special rules and stuff. Horribly overcomplicated. If you watch the video on screen from Snipe and Wib, they do a very good job explaining how both games worked. And they did have that same Spacefarers aesthetic, where they were on different planets fighting off raiders and such. Now, as old as it is, these games aren't forgotten. Planet 28 exists, that's an updated version of these old games, and it has its own line of miniatures you can get. I've seen it play tested, and it seems pretty fun. A very much Necromunda-esque experience playing this game. As well as that, Ramshackle Games is coming out with Necroplanet soon, which is a very cool, almost Gygax design. So it looks very Forbidden Planet. You're on a planet that you really shouldn't be on, and now the ancient, long-dead civilization is waking up, and it doesn't like you trying to scavenge on itself. Now, when you look at the distinct style of the Solar Auxilia, one thing that especially comes to my mind is the Ray Punk aesthetic, or Raygun Gothic, which is basically what they thought the future was going to be like in the 1930s to 60s, where they had these spaceships and these technology and, you know, big space helmets, but they didn't really understand. They never worked out how exactly things worked. People just went to different strange planets, and they saw aliens there, which also looked very human. And they saw robots that were big clunky, and they shot rays. It's a very naive, but also very optimistic look at the future and how adventuring would be done beyond the stars, thus giving it the very retro aesthetic as well. But it does really encapsulate what happened before the heresy. because this was part of the Space Crusade. It was a part where we were adventuring, we were rediscovering, we were finding these new planets. We were explorers as well as unifiers. It wasn't just about being an army force to go retake things. It was also about finding what we've lost and finding new things we hadn't seen before. So there was definitely an optimism, a brave new world to explore. But as I mentioned before, after the heresy, this whole optimism collapses because the galaxy is now basically split in two. We know there are horrific things out in space and they're coming for us now, so we have to defend ourselves. And with humanity now afraid of another heresy on the future, they have to divide everything so nothing can be as powerful as it was before. So the Solar Auxilia had to be split into Imperial Guard and Imperial Navy. This led to the Imperial Guard basically having identities just fitting to their planet. They now had their own style. They weren't exploring, they were just living on that planet, and when needed would be sent to another planet similar, or if the features that planet gave them an advantage, they would go to a planet where they could use those. So it's very interesting to see this decline. This is a stagnation, a progression, and just instead a consolidation of holding on to what we had before. Instead of finding new ideas, we're finding strength in the old ideas. Thus, we're going back to older methods of war, like the Krieg do with their trenches and their siege artillery. We're going back to the Catechins with their skirmish and jungle fighting abilities. There isn't just one unified army now. There's a lot of little separate armies. Everyone's going away from one big solid plan. Everyone's got their own thing they're working on now. So I really believe that helps fit this theme of the heresy was the time of optimism. That was the golden era of exploration, before the heresy. And now things are getting much worse, much more grim, and people are no longer having that optimism they used to. So now we have to ask ourselves, which design is better? Well, not better so much as what do you enjoy more? What do you think stands out more individually? Me personally, I think the Solar Auxiliary have a design that stands out so much more unique than what 40k does. Because when you look at like a Cadian or Catechin, like I said, it's a modern soldier. You look at that and you say, oh yeah, you've got army men. You could be playing a modern game, a future game, a game set in World War II. It's very universal how you could use a lot of the 40k guard units. But with the Solar Auxilia, that's very specific. You know these are guys in space. You know this is set in the future. Things have a fun, futuristic edge to them. But on the other hand, the 40k models can have a lot more individual personalities to them. They're not just wearing helmets. They have unique styles based off their regiments. You could have a whole different story about Catechans making friends with these Cadians and they're fighting together, using each other. So I think both have their own special uses and they both have their own characteristics which really help them stand out. So I'd say neither is better than the other, but I would say I still kind of am drawn to Solar Auxilia. There's just something about them that just has a very unique look and a very unique style, which you just don't see very often. I think that's the big point. You just don't see it very often. It's more niche than the other guys. So, yeah, I'd love to hear what everyone else thought. What do you think is the better one? And which ones do you like? Which models don't you like? What have you thought about adapting for either game? But please, let me know, and I'll talk to you soon. Bye.